Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Wise Decision Maker Show, where we help you make the wisest and most profitable decisions. My name is Dr. Gleb Tsipursky. I'm the CEO of Disaster Avoidance Experts, the future of work consultancy that sponsors the Wise Decision Maker Show. And today with me is Niklas Dorn, who is the CEO and co-founder of Filestage. We'll learn about Filestage a little bit later. But first, Niklas, tell me a little bit more about how you manage a fully remote team of about 50 workers in the context of a lot of companies right now trying to get their employees back into the office. So what's your secret to being able to successfully manage this team, which a lot of companies seem to not be able to do very well?
I think it all starts with having a really good team in place first. So I think remote work, typically you should already hire people that want to work remotely. I think that's one and a super important component. And then on the other side, I think on the one side, it involves a lot of culture work. So you need to be very clear about how you communicate, where you communicate, what the processes are, what kind of tools you're using, and give all of that to your remote employees. And I think this is one of the core things. And then the last but not least, I think it's all about making sure people don't feel alone. You still build like a company culture, so it's not just about work and productivity and results, but it's also about making sure that people are heard and they don't feel disconnected. And you're really involved and make sure you know how everybody's feeling. Basically, I think those are the most important things. Yeah.
Okay, so I can imagine hiring all remotely. That's an easy thing to understand. From what I saw, there's something like about 15% of all jobs on LinkedIn are currently fully remote, but about 50% of LinkedIn users are applying to those jobs. So clearly there's a large demand to work remotely. But let's talk about those other two components, the communication/collaboration and the isolation/culture. Tell me a little bit more about how you communicate, especially I know that there's differences between asynchronous and synchronous communication, collaboration. So if you can talk a little bit more about that, that would be helpful.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, if you like, I can share some results in this direction. So, for example, what we understood and found is that 81% of all the companies today, again, like go back to hybrid work or from the office work, which I think is super interesting. And I think the main reason for that is potentially they think employees are maybe more productive when they work in the office. But at the same time, I think they know that employees basically want to work remotely. So that's, I think, why they go for the hybrid model, to just have both worlds. The funny thing is, at the same time, 75% of all creative collaboration now happens remotely. So basically, you force people to come back to the office, and then they sit down in front of their computers to then work remotely together again, which is for me quite paradox. But yeah, this is, for example, something we found out in our report lately.
And so tell me a little bit more about how your company handles the communication issue. So what do you do to make sure that you communicate effectively among your staff?
Yeah. So one big part is basically we try to reduce the number of meetings. That's one big issue we face. And we said, okay, on the one side, bringing together the right people to a meeting always takes a lot of organization and basically interrupts people's flow. So we think, yes, you need meetings, but you need to be careful not to have too many meetings. And it really makes sense basically to push asynchronous communication. One thing we do on the one side in terms of asynchronous communication is to use tools like Loom or Vidyard that allow you to screen record yourself on your computer. So for example, if you have any thoughts to express, if you want to share a presentation, you just do a quick screen recording. Then you have a video, and this is a video you can then share via a link, via Slack or Microsoft Teams or anything in this direction, or even attach it to your project management tool task. And then a day later, if your colleague has finally time and focus, basically, your colleague can watch your video and gets the full picture, like can see your expressions, your emotions, but also see your screen. And this is something we do quite often. Plus, we believe a lot like in good documentation. So let's say we organize things in projects and then have tasks for things. And then basically we have comments on certain things and link the right documents there and really make sure it's documented and easy to follow. Yeah.
Excellent. And let's go to the other one, the culture and isolation. So how do you make sure that people aren't isolated?
I think we could talk for a couple of days about it. In a nutshell, we have a couple of things in place to make sure they don't feel isolated. So on the one side, we have daily meetings organized in the teams to really just check in on things. Then on the other side, what we do is, let's say we have donut calls in place. And those donut calls randomly bring together two people from the organization to talk about non-work stuff, basically to talk everything but work. And this is really, really helpful. And on top of that, we do a lot of games online, remote collaboration games that are organized through the HR department, but also in different departments. We just say, okay, let's spend half an hour together and just play something creative together online to get to know each other better. We often use breaker questions to really come up with good discussions. And last but not least, not too often, but once in a while, we also meet in real life and really try to have company retreats, team retreats, a couple of days together where we really hang out together and just also do non-work related things. Because I think you don't need to be together all the time, but once in a while, it's really good to just bond and spend this time together to work more easily together afterwards. And once you have seen a person just for one time in real life, I think you also have a better understanding what kind of humor this kind of person has, how they communicate. And then afterwards, you know how to read messages and how to read a person in a better way. And so I strongly believe in this kind of mixture between good online, let's say, games and things in this direction to really get to know each other, plus some retreats from time to time.
Retreats are really helpful. I've helped 22 organizations by now transition to long-term hybrid / remote work arrangements. And specifically to deal with some of the problems that you described, most of the organizations chose a hybrid first modality. But it's kind of a pretty flexible modality where it's maybe most are coming in something like 1 day a week. And some of the employees at these companies are still fully remote, but those who need to collaborate more intensely tend to come together once a week in the office to have that social bonding, to have that team trust building. So how do you solve those more intense collaboration needs that you wouldn't solve through a Loom meeting, through sending a Loom message or a Vidyard message? Those intense collaborations, those nuanced conversations, maybe performance evaluation, debates, conflicts, strategy conversations. What do you do around those?
In my personal opinion, you can do everything in online meetings the same way you can do them in in-person meetings. So I personally think work-wise, you don't need to meet in person. However, again, I feel like for personal connections, it makes sense to sometimes have those offline bonding events basically to come together and again, like have a bit like a different vibe. So there it's really healthy. So what I personally think is sometimes, especially when it comes to brainstorming a new strategy or something like in this direction, where it should be really creative and maybe a bit crazy, then it's easier to do that in real life and just bring the people together and have a good experience. But then let's say if it comes down to really approach something, to structure a project, to really work on things together, I think it's at least as effective, or I think personally even more effective, to work online together. Let's say have two screens, and then on the one side you see the others, on the other side everybody has like the collaboration board where you can brainstorm ideas virtually together. So I think it's more like a way of working and how you approach things, rather than, let's say, it's either remote or hybrid or
Now, a reason that many companies are trying to bring their employees together is for culture. And you mentioned that at the beginning of the interview, so I want to circle back to culture in particular. So a number of firms are saying, well, we're going to lose our culture if we don't get our employees back into the office. And most people are not as flexible as having 1 day in the office. It's more like 3-4 days in the office.
Mm-hmm.
So tell me a little bit more about how you cultivate culture in Filestage.
Mm-hmm. I think the main question is what does culture mean? what is
Mm-hmm.
culture as a company? And I have to say, before I started a company fresh out of university, I was always thinking like, okay, company culture and company values, that's something you read in a management book, but it's more like management blah, blah, you don't really need. Today, I would say company values and the culture is the most important thing for a company. But for me, it has nothing to do with being a physical company or remote company. It's totally independent from that. For me, it's more like how you behave and what kind of values you share and live. So for example, at Filestage, we strongly believe that we are a feedback company. That is super important in terms of, on the one side, we want to give proactively feedback to others on their work and what they do. But at the same time, we also want to receive proactively like feedback from any other in the company. And we always assume that our colleagues have the best intentions. And that's something that is super helpful. Coming back to when you get a written feedback or something, you can read it that way or this way. But if you keep in mind your colleague has the best intentions, then normally you will read out the good stuff and not the bad stuff. And so I think things like that are super important in the company. Also, sharing context is for us a really big value, and I think will make people really believe in something. So I think if you have great people and you don't give them all the context and transparency, how can they really work and take decisions on their own? And for me, this is a lot about trust. It doesn't matter if it's, again, remote or in the office. So we try to make a lot of information really like accessible for everybody in the company. So the main KPIs, everybody has access to it. Okay. We share it. If we go for a new strategy, we really try to explain why. And then afterwards, we also share, let's say, the details in the presentation so people can look it up and really understand, okay, this is why we are going this direction, but they can also challenge it. And then basically based on that, they can also create their own strategy in their department. And for me, this really makes a company culture, rather than saying, hey, we are a company, we have a nice coffee machine, or we have a really cool room where we can hang out together and Friday there's pizza. Okay, I can also order pizza on myself somewhere. So I think it's more about the values you live and how you live it and how you include people and how much room you give them to grow. Then, yeah, again, like spending time together in a room. So, yeah.
So it sounds like you have to be much more intentional about creating culture in the remote setting, because in a just in-person setting, the culture often happens to be whatever is the vibes that are created by people hanging out together and talking with each other. And so you're saying in a remote setting, it has to be much more intentional.
That's true. I think also, if you don't proactively manage a culture, somehow you will still have a culture. But the question is, what kind of culture? And yeah, so for me, it starts with how you hire people. Who do you search for when you hire people? But then again, we try to include our values already in our job interviews and really talk about the values with people and say, this is the way we work. This is how we like to work. Does it fit with how you see it? So we really try to make this kind of transparent again. And then from there, I think it's also many different factors. So again, like you need processes in the background in terms of regular career conversations, feedback conversations, making sure people are comfortable, but can also share things with you whenever they want to share. Plus, we have certain mechanisms in place. For example, we have a tool that is regular asking employees on a regular basis about their happiness, but certain questions. And then they can decide if it's like anonymous or if they would like to share like their name with HR so they can really do something about it. So we have different, let's say, options to understand how people are feeling and what kind of culture we right now have and how we are doing over time, if people are happy or not. And I think this is super, super important. Yeah.
That's definitely valuable. Tell me a little bit more. So you said you started the company coming out of university. Tell me a little bit more about the company and what it does and why you created it. What problem is it trying to solve?
Yeah, so we started Filestage in 2015. So my co-founders and me, and my one co-founder is coming from the advertising industry. And I also worked in marketing before, during my master's, but also before. And we always had one problem when you create content such as a video or a podcast or a product catalog or a website. You always start to be super creative, and at a certain moment you need to get feedback from other people in your organization. You need to get feedback from legal, you might need to get feedback from marketing, you maybe need feedback from your client if you work as an agency, and this process for us was completely broken. So the creative part was super nice, was cool, but once you started to share content for feedback, it was an endless meeting sessions, email ping pong, people calling you, and feedback in 30 different places. And that was super annoying. And so we said, why isn't there a tool? It's 2015, there should be a software already, and there wasn't. And so we started this initially as a video commenting tool, and today it's a full review and approval workflow software that allows you to share any kind of content. So again, like websites, documents, videos, images, and basically run a review and approval process through your organization.
And tell me about how you use that tool internally for asynchronous communication.
So one use case obviously is marketing. So whenever we produce new marketing content, for example, a new advertising campaign for Filestage online, or if we produce a explainer video for our solution, then the moment basically we start with a script, we typically take that script and then collaborate already on the script and share it with a couple of people to get insights, feedback. Then we fine tune the script. And from there, normally the first version of the video, for example, will then be shared via Filestage. And then everybody within Filestage that has the link can access the file and can give direct feedback